Hussein I, King of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, I invite His Majesty to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, when I last had the privilege of addressing this distinguished body, the United Nations itself was facing serious problems that seemed to threaten its effective survival. Whether it can preserve its moral authority will in no small measure depend on what action it takes to meet the most serious crisis it has faced since the attack on the Suez Canal in 1956. Then, the United Nations took a firm stand and by its moral power forced the aggressors to give up their gains and retire to their original positions. We are confronted with the same situation today, and the aggressor is one of the belligerents of 1956. The United Nations must again choose whether it will close its eyes to aggression or force the aggressor to give up his spoils of war. Mr. President, my mission is a serious and solemn one: to speak to this distinguished group of world citizens on behalf of my Arab nation. I have a simple purpose and a simple objective: to state clearly our case in the present crisis and to urge that the issue be resolved promptly and with justice. I can very well imagine the hue and cry that would have risen had the Arabs attacked first, and how bitter would be the denunciation if we were today in Tel Aviv. Why this double standard on the part of some powers in considering the rights of the Arabs and the rights of the Israelis? We know, of course, that world sympathy for the Jews created Israel in the first place. But world sympathy for a tragic past does not permit condoning aggressive acts on the part of those who were once the victims of aggression. I will not speak to you only about peace, for the precondition of peace is justice. When we have achieved justice, we will have achieved peace in the Middle East. Peace by submission of the victim and security for what he has stolen. What Jordan and the Arabs want, on the other hand, is peace with justice. In order to put today's challenge to the United Nations into proper perspective, it is necessary to go back to the situation that existed before the Israelis made their sudden attack on the morning of June 5th. These were not normal borders that the Israelis crossed to rain down death and destruction on the Arab countries. These were truce lines drawn 19 years ago These were the truce lines over which hundreds of thousands of Palestinian Arabs had left in panic and fear in 1948 to become the 1,300,000 refugees whose existence today is a rebuke to this great body. I need not remind the General Assembly that we would not today have sustained the deaths of thousands of our soldiers and citizens if the Palestine injustice, with all its many facets, had been prevented. Today's war is not a new war, but part of the old war, which will go on for scores of years if the moral and physical wrong done to the Arabs is not righted. The latest aggression occurred on June 5th, when Israel, by her own admission, opened an all-out air and ground attack against the Arab states. In an age of supersonic aircraft and guided missiles, with distances shortened to minutes, aggressors have a unique military advantage. No vital interests suffered. There has not been an Israeli ship through these straits for the last 2.5 years. This is clearly not a question of vital interest. It provides no justification for armed aggression, the occupation of thousands of square miles of territory, the death of thousands of human beings, and the destruction of their cities and homes. We stand today as the victims of that aggression. An attack against one of us is an attack against us all. We have for long known this, and Israel has frequently made ruthless attacks on one country for an alleged provocation attributed to another. This was true in their destruction of the Jordanian village of Al-Sammua, so recently condemned in the Security Council. We have always been joined together in regional defense agreements, never knowing where the next strike will be made, never knowing when the ominous bridgehead, which the existence of Israel has constituted in the heart of the Arab world, will break out. Israel, I need not tell you, is a skilled adversary in the joint arts of concealed aggression and propaganda. Thus, it has lived in contempt for United Nations resolutions and has lived in arrogant defiance of the United Nations and its charter for the past 19 years. Each year, as the General Assembly meets to consider the extension of UNRWA's mission, the General Assembly reaffirms its moral position, namely, that the Arabs of Palestine should be permitted to return to their homes or else be compensated for their losses. And what has Israel done to honor this commitment? I need not answer the question. Nor do I have to remind you that this latest attack by Israel is not an isolated example, but part of a deliberate Israeli expansionist policy. Although they have somehow made it appear that they are a tiny, unarmed country surrounded by Arab bullies, the facts are that the Israelis and not the Arabs have denounced repeatedly in these chambers, have been denounced repeatedly in these chambers for their aggressions over the last 19 years. For many of these years, Israel had been planning the master aggression that began on June 5th. This was no sudden act of violence. It was not even one of its so-called retaliatory acts. It was an act of war as vicious as the blitzkrieg of Poland, or as stunning as the sneak attack on Pearl Harbor. That Jordan, without adequate means, was unable to cope with it is a matter I will deeply regret all the days of my life. Against undreamt of firepower both in the air and on the land, our men fought heroically and fell in defense of every inch of our beloved homeland. I should like to state here, for the record, that Jordan complied immediately with the United Nations request for a ceasefire, but it was forced to continue the fight because Israel, although it had agreed to the ceasefire, obeyed it only when it had accomplished its predetermined objectives. Although the complete record of the Israeli army's behavior has not yet been fully assembled, it is already clear that they were as vicious in their treatment of our soldiers and civilians as any barbarian invader. Specifically, I charge the Israelis with the widespread use of napalm and fragmentation bombs, with inhuman and indecent treatment of prisoners of war, with looting and destroying Jordanian and other Arab towns and villages, and driving the inhabitants from their homes, with adding to the refugee problem by acts of vandalism, terror, and confusion, with firing at or over the heads of refugees to prevent them from recrossing the Jordan and returning to their homes. Each of these is a serious charge and would be sufficient in itself to earn United Nations condemnation. But what concerns me most, and what should concern you equally, is the fact that unless this great body acts speedily and effectively, the plight of refugees will double in size, sorrow, misery, and death. Not only are thousands of older refugees fleeing from their camps that have been their lot for 19 years, but thousands more of new refugees are being created. These are the fruits of Israeli victory. We have heard talk from the Israelis themselves and from the lips of their friendly advisors about magnanimity in victory. There can be no magnanimity when the victor is in the wrong. There is no magnanimity in disposing of the spoils of war. We come now to the time of decision. What is the United Nations going to do about the serious and explosive situation which confronts it? First, there must be a clear recognition of the fact that the territory of 3 members of the United Nations has deliberately and with premeditation been violated by one other represented here. Its troops are today on the soil of those 3 countries. The whole of the West Bank of Jordan, my country, is still occupied. This is a completely unacceptable and intolerable situation. What then is the duty of the United Nations? It can be nothing else but the swift condemnation of the aggressor and the enforcing of the return of the Israeli troops to the lines held before the attack of June 5th, to permit Israel to retain its gain as a bargaining weapon, is to permit the aggressor to use the fruits of his aggression to gain the ends for which he went to war. This is immoral. It will not be borne. An added danger in this form of political blackmail is that while Israel remains in possession of the land, she continues her aggression. The Israelis are engaged in destroying the homes and property of the people. Their aim is clear: to make life so impossible for our people that they will have nothing to return to. This is the policy Israel followed so successfully in 1948, and which she appears determined to repeat again. Jordan is a small country, as you know. What has happened to us is as great a tragedy as could happen to any country moving forward across the threshold into a peaceful, happy, and progressive future. Today, all that is in ruins. The largest part of our most productive land is occupied by the enemy, inhabited by 800,000 of our people, with about 150,000 fled into a refugee status up till now. Jerusalem is in foreign hands for the second time in 1,300 years. So too is Bethlehem, Hebron, Jericho, and much of the growing fertile valley of the Jordan River. All these must be swiftly returned with the support of this august body assembled here today. But we shall, if we have to. The battle which began on June 5th will then become only one battle in what will be a long war. The political state of David and Solomon lasted only 70 years. That of the Crusaders, just under 100. It might be well for Israel to reread its history. To this United Nations General Assembly, I wish to address one final word. Jordan obeyed immediately and in good faith the ceasefire order. It did so confident that the United Nations would never allow aggression to pay. Should the United Nations not live up to the promise of its order, ceasefire, and should it permit the aggression, should it permit the aggressor to keep even 1 square foot of his spoils, it will never, under any circumstances, anywhere in the world, be allowed to say the words ceasefire again and be obeyed. To the many nations that have already expressed their support for our position, we are truly grateful. And to those who will speak after in endorsement, we are also indebted. God grant that out of these discussions, the path to a just conclusion will become clear, and that the nations assembled here will have the wisdom to take it. Thank you.